Sleep tight, old man, my wife whispered as she turned the wheel, locking me inside a concrete box buried 20 feet underground. My son David just stood there in the hallway, staring at his expensive loafers, too cowardly to even look me in the eye as I screamed. They thought sealing me in my own storm shelter was the perfect way to steal my empire. They forgot that I didn't just pour that concrete, I mastered it. They were busy planning a funeral to celebrate my death, unaware that they were actually preparing the stage for my resurrection. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. It helps to know I'm not just shouting into the void. Let me take you back to the moment the lights went out. The darkness was not merely an absence of light. It was a physical substance. It possessed mass and density, pressing against my eyelids with the weight of wet sand. It filled my throat, thick and suffocating, tasting of stale copper and the terrifying dusty dryness of earth that has never known the sun. I woke not with a start, but with a gasp, a desperate, violent heave of the chest as my lungs fought against a crushing pressure. My body felt foreign, distant, as if I were operating it via a delay. I clawed at my throat, my fingers tangling in silk. The fabric was smooth, cool against my clammy skin. My blue silk pajamas. Where am I? The thought was a frantic bird, trapped in the cage of my skull. I tried to inhale, but the air was wrong. It didn't carry the hum of the central air conditioning or the subtle lavender scent of the master bedroom. It was dead air, recycled. It carried the metallic tang of old ductwork and the unmistakable earthy dampness of curing concrete. I knew that smell. I had built an empire on that smell. It was the scent of foundations, of things buried deep to hold up the sky. I am underground. The realization hit me before I even opened my eyes, a cold needle sliding into the base of my spine. I tried to move my left arm, but it was heavy, leaden, unresponsive. Pins and needles pricked at my fingertips. I had been lying on it. I forced my eyes open. There was nothing. Just an abyss so absolute it felt like it was swallowing me whole. For a terrifying moment, I thought I had gone blind. I blinked, once, twice, trying to summon shapes from the void. "Martha?" I croaked. My voice was a rusted hinge, scraping against a throat filled with broken glass. It was a weak, pathetic sound that died instantly, absorbed by the walls. There was no echo. Soundproofing, panic, cold and sharp, began to rise in my chest. I sat up, the canvas of the cot beneath me groaning in protest. This wasn't my bed. This wasn't the high thread count Egyptian cotton sheets Martha had bought 3 years before she died, the ones I still slept in because they smelled faintly of her safety. This was rough fabric, military grade. I swung my legs over the edge. My feet hit the floor. Concrete, smooth, troweled, sealed, but unmistakably cold. It wept with condensation, a thin, slick film of moisture that made my skin crawl. "David," I called out, louder this time. "Jessica," silence, just the silence of a tomb. And then, beneath the silence, a sound, thrum, thrum, a low, mechanical drone, vibrating through the floorboards and into my bare feet. It was the heartbeat of a machine, a ventilation fan. I fumbled in the dark, my hands sweeping through the empty air until my fingers brushed against a cold, hanging chain. I pulled it. Light exploded. It was a single, naked bulb caged in rusted wire, hanging from the center of the ceiling. It cast a sickly, jaundice yellow circle of light that flickered, buzzed, and then steadied. I squeezed my eyes shut against the glare, waiting for the spots to fade. When I opened them again, the room came into focus. My stomach turned over, a knot of dread tightening into a hard stone. I was Thomas Vance. I had started Vance Construction with a shovel, a beat-up Ford truck, and a stubborn refusal to quit 40 years ago. I knew structural load. I knew tensile strength. And I knew this room. I had drawn the blueprints myself on a coffee-stained napkin in a diner in 1985, during the height of the Thad War paranoia. This was the storm shelter. Sub-basement level 3. It was a box designed to survive the apocalypse. 3 foot thick, reinforced concrete walls laced with rebar, a steel blast door that weighed as much as a small car, a closed-loop ventilation system designed to scrub fallout from the air. I had built it to keep the horrors of the world out, but a fortress, Martha used to say, is just a prison you build for yourself. I stood up and the room spun. Vertigo washed over me, hot and acidic. I hugged the wall for support. The concrete was clammy, weeping tears of condensation. I looked down at myself. The blue silk pajamas were wrinkled, stained with sweat. I reached up to rub my throbbing temple, and my hand halted. My wrist felt strangely light. I froze. I looked at my left wrist. The Patek Philippe was gone, the platinum band that had sat there for 20 years. A gift to myself when the company went public was missing. I checked my left hand. My wedding ring, a simple gold band I hadn't taken off since 1978. It was gone. A strip of untanned, pale skin was the only proof it had ever been there. They hadn't just moved me. They had stripped me. They had erased Thomas Vance before they even buried him. I stumbled toward the door. My legs were weak, trembling, like a newborn foal's. The drugs, whatever they had sedated me with, were still swimming in my blood. The door was a slab of gray steel, dominating the wall. I grabbed the heavy iron wheel in the center. The metal bit into my palms, freezing cold. "Hello," I screamed, the sound raw and desperate. "Is anyone there? David, I'm locked in." I pulled the wheel. I threw my weight against it. I braced my feet against the slick floor and heaved until black spots danced in my vision. It didn't budge, not a millimeter. I knew the mechanism. I had selected it. Hardened steel, deadbolts, 3 inches in diameter, extending into the concrete frame. When that door was locked from the outside, God himself couldn't open it without the key. I pounded on the steel with my fists until my knuckles bruised, until the skin split and smeared red on the gray metal. "Open the door. This isn't funny. Jessica? David?" My breath came in short, ragged gasps. The room felt smaller now. The walls seemed to be leaning in, the weight of the mansion above, pressing down on the structural arch of the ceiling. Then a sound cut through the frantic rhythm of my breathing. Crackle! I spun around. To the right of the doorframe, mounted high on the wall, was a small, dusty plastic box. An intercom system, a relic of the 90s I had never bothered to upgrade. A red light flickered on. It stared at me like an unblinking eye. "Thomas?" The voice was cool, calm, utterly devoid of warmth or surprise. It sounded like ice cracking on a frozen lake. "Jessica?" I gasped. I stumbled toward the speaker, pressing my forehead against the cold plastic grill. Ardits for the connection, for the reality of another human being. "Jessica, thank God. The mechanism must have jammed. Call David, get the keys from the study. I don't know how I got down here." There was a pause. A long, heavy silence stretched out, filled only by the roar of the ventilation fan and the frantic thudding of my own heart. "You didn't sleepwalk, Thomas," she said. Her voice was flat, conversational. She might have been discussing a change in the weather or a dinner reservation. "And David isn't coming." Confusion clouded my mind, thick and gray. "What? Is he hurt? Is there an intruder?" "David is upstairs," she continued, her voice drifting through the speaker with a terrifying serenity. "He's grieving. We all are. It's been a very hard 2 days." "Grieving?" I whispered. The word hung in the damp air, foreign and absurd. "What are you talking about?" A cold dread, far worse than the darkness, began to seep into my marrow. "You died, Thomas," she said. The world stopped. "Tuesday night, in your sleep. Massive heart failure. It was very peaceful. You didn't feel a thing." My blood turned to ice. I shook my head, backing away from the speaker, as if it were venomous. "I am standing right here," I roared, the shock swiftly turning to a white-hot rage that burned through the sedative fog. "I am alive. I am talking to you legally," she replied, her voice sharpening, losing its feigned softness. "You are ash in a bronze urn on the living room mantel. Dr. Evans, you remember him, the one with the gambling debts you used to leverage. He signed the certificate this morning. The funeral was beautiful, closed casket. Of course, we told the children you looked too peaceful to disturb. Dr. Evans. I had paid off his bookie 3 times. I owned him. I held the deed to his practice. And now she held the deed to his life. Why?" I screamed. "I gave you everything. I picked you up from nothing. I gave you a home, I gave David the vice presidency. I built this life for you. You gave us a cage, she snapped. The venom finally seeped through the speaker, acid and burning. You controlled every penny, Thomas. You monitored the mileage on the car. You threatened to put the estate into a trust for the orphans if we didn't dance to your tune. You were going to cut us off? You were going to leave David with nothing but a salary and a pat on the head. I remembered the argument last Sunday. In the steppe, the sun had been streaming in, illuminating dust motes. I had told them they were soft, that they had never calloused their hands, that they needed to learn the value of work, or I would force them to learn it. I tightened the leash too much, I thought bitterly, and the dog bit back. I won't let my children grow up on a budget while you play saint with your charity foundations, she hissed. I won't let you act the philanthropist while we beg for scraps. So you kill me? I screamed, spit flying from my lips. You think you'll get away with murder? This is a fortress, Jessica, but it's not a tomb. Someone will find me. I haven't killed anyone, she said smoothly. The mask was back in place. The grieving widow, I'm just keeping you safe. You have water. You have food. The ventilation is on. You can live down there a long time, Thomas. Long enough for what? Long enough for us to liquidate the assets. Sell the company to the investors you hated, the Chinese consortium, and move to Europe. By the time anyone finds this room, if they ever do, we'll be ghosts. David won't let you, I said. My voice shook. It was my last hope. My structural pillar. He's my son. He has a conscience. Jessica laughed. It was a cruel, sharp sound, like expensive crystal shattering on a stone floor. David, she said, savoring the name, is the one who helped me carry you down the stairs. He held your legs, Thomas. He said you were heavier than you looked. The intercom clicked off. The red light died. I stood there frozen. The silence of the room rushed back in, louder than before. He held your legs, my son. My boy, the child I had taught to ride a bike on the winding driveway, the boy whose hand I had held at Martha's funeral while we both wept, the man I had tried to mold into a leader, even when I saw the cracks in his foundation. He had carried me like a sack of garbage into a dungeon and left me to rot. My legs gave out completely. I didn't fall. I collapsed, slid down the rough concrete wall until I hit the floor. I sat there, pulling my knees to my chest, burying my face in my hands. The physical trap, the 3-foot walls, the steel door was nothing compared to the emotional collapse. The structural integrity of my life had failed. The load-bearing walls of family and loyalty had turned to dust. I wept. For the first time in 40 years, Thomas Vance wept. Not for fear of death, not for the cold or the darkness, but for the death of the family I thought I had. I cried until my throat was raw, until there were no tears left, only dry, racking heaves. I sat there for hours, watching the yellow light bulb buzz and flicker. But as the tears dried, as the shock began to calcify, something else took their place. It started in my gut, a cold, hard knot. I looked at the walls. I looked at the rivets in the steel door. I was a builder. I solved problems. I moved earth. I poured stone. I manipulated physics to my will. I looked up at the yellow light bulb. I am not dead yet, I whispered to the empty room. The despair hardened into a diamond of rage, cold, sharp, unbreakable. They had buried me, but they had forgotten one thing. They had buried me in my own workshop. Time detached itself from the sun, down here beneath the crushing earth of the earth in the mansion I had built. Time became a liquid thick, viscous, and indistinguishable. Without the sunrise to mark the morning or the crickets to sing the evening, I was forced to rely on the acoustic rhythms of the house above to anchor my sanity. The sub-basement acted as a the concrete carrying the vibrations of the living world down to the dead one. I learned to categorize the footsteps. There was the heavy, measured tread of men in rubber-soled boots. Private security. They walked with a patrolling cadence, pausing at corners. There was the sharp, staccato click-clack of Jessica's stilettos, fast, purposeful, angry. She walked like she was trying to puncture the floorboards. And then there was the shuffling, hesitant gait of my son. David dragged his feet. He walked as if he were carrying a heavy stone on his shoulders. Every time I heard that slow, sliding scuff, a fresh wave of grief washed over me, heavier than the concrete walls. "Walk like a man, David," I whispered to the ceiling, an old reflex I couldn't suppress. "Pick up your feet." Survival became an engineering problem. The room contained a stainless steel toilet and a small sink in the corner, the kind used in prison cells. Jessica, in her twisted, calculated mercy, had left a stack of canned goods on a metal shelf. Peaches, kidney beans, condensed cream of mushroom soup, no can opener. But the cans had pull tabs and a case of water bottles. 24 bottles, 16 9 ounces each. I sat on the cot and did the math. A human male of my size and age needs approximately 2 liters of water a day to maintain organ function. To survive without activity, maybe 1.5. I had enough for a month. Maybe 6 weeks if I pushed my kidneys to the brink of failure. But I wasn't just going to survive. I was going to work, and work required calories. On the 4th day, or what I calculated to be the 4th day based on the cycles of the HVAC system, the dampness won its first victory. The sub-basement was 55 degrees Fahrenheit with 90% humidity. It was a cold that didn't just sit on the skin. It invaded, it soaked into the fibers of my silk pajamas and settled deep in my chest. I woke up shivering so violently, my teeth clacked together. My skin burned, sensitive to the touch, while my core felt like a block of ice. A fever, panic flared. I was 70 years old. In this damp, stagnant air, a simple respiratory infection would become pneumonia within 48 hours. Pneumonia would mean delirium, unconsciousness, and death. If I succumbed to sickness, Jessica wouldn't need to lift a finger. She would just have to wait for the coughing to stop. "Get up," I commanded myself. I stripped off my damp silk shirt. The air bit at my pale, shivering torso. I faced the concrete wall. I placed my palms against the slick surface. 1. I pushed away. My triceps screamed. My shoulders, stiff with age and the atrophy of luxury, protested. 2. My breath wheezed in my chest. A rattle, fluid in the lungs. 3. I forced myself into a rhythm. I had to generate metabolic heat. I had to turn my body into a furnace to burn out the infection. I did push-ups until my arms gave out. Then I did squats until my legs shook. Then I paced the 10-foot length of the cell, back and forth swinging my arms, forcing the blood to circulate. I drank gallons of water, rationing my supply with painful discipline, flushing the toxins. But the fever spiked. I lay on the cot, sweat drenching the canvas, my mind untethering from reality. The buzzing of the light bulb became a roar. The shadows in the corners began to detach and walk. I saw Martha. She was standing in the corner by the sink, wearing her wide-brimmed gardening hat and the soil-stained gloves she used to wear when tending the azaleas. She looked young, radiant. Not the frail woman the cancer had taken. "Built a fortress, Thomas," she whispered, her voice sounding like wind through dry leaves. She shook her head, a sad, knowing smile on her lips. "Reinforced concrete, blast doors. You were so afraid of the bombs." "I wanted to keep you safe," I mumbled, my tongue thick and swollen. "You forgot to build a gate, Tom," she said softly. "You built a box to keep the world out, but you locked yourself in." "I miss you," I sobbed. The pain of her absence was sharper than the betrayal of my son. "I'm so tired, Martha. I just want to sleep." She stepped closer. I could almost smell the lavender laundry detergent she used. "Not yet, old man," she said sternly. "If you come to me now, you leave David with her. You leave your legacy to the wolves. Is that who you are? A quitter?" The vision faded, dissolving into the gray concrete. "No," I gritted out. "I never quit." I fought the sickness for 3 days. I fought it with movement, with water, and with a hatred so pure it burned the virus out of my blood. When the fever finally broke, I was weak, hollowed out, but my mind was crystalline. The despair was gone. The grief was packed away in a locked box in my mind. In their place was the cold, analytical detachment of the structural engineer. I began to inspect my prison. I ran my hands over every inch of the walls. Solid, poured concrete. No seams, no cracks. I checked the floor drain, welded shut with a steel grate. I checked the door hinges, internal, inaccessible. Then I looked up. High on the west wall, near the ceiling, was the intake grate. It was small, maybe 6 inches by 10 inches. It connected to the mansion's old HVAC system, the backup loop I had installed in case the main scrubbers failed. I dragged the heavy metal cot across the room. The legs screeched against the concrete, a sound that set my teeth on edge. I climbed up. The cot wobbled. I peered through the slats. The maintenance hatch for the ventilation unit was screwed shut with 4 heavy-duty industrial bolts. Hex head bolts. I didn't have a wrench. I didn't have a screwdriver. I checked my pockets. Nothing. I sat on the cot, staring at the bolts, visualizing the torque required to break the paint seal. I looked down at my pants. The silk pajamas had a zipper fly, the pull tab. It was made of zinc alloy, cheap but metal. I gripped the small tab. I twisted it. It wouldn't snap. I spent an hour working it back and forth. Metal fatigue, my only ally. Bend, straighten, bend, straighten. Finally, snap. I held the small, jagged piece of metal between my thumb and forefinger. It was flimsy. It was pathetic. But it was a tool. It took me 2 days to loosen the first bolt. My fingers bled. My nails broke and tore into the quick. The zinc tab bent, and I had to hammer it flat again, using the heel of my shoe, against the floor. But I got it out, then the second, then the third. When the hatch finally swung open on its rusted hinges, I wasn't met with fresh air or a way out. I was met with a narrow, dusty galvanized steel duct, barely wider than my head. It was too small for a man to crawl through, even a starving man, but it was perfect for sound. I realized then what I had found. The ductwork was metal, continuous. It ran through the walls of the house like a nervous system. I stuck my head as far as I could into the opening. The smell of dust and old attic air filled my nose. The scent of freedom. The acoustics of the metal ductwork acted like a primitive amplifier, catching vibrations from the upper floors. I closed my eyes and listened. I heard the rhythmic thump, whoosh of the washing machine. 2 floors up, I heard the murmur of the television in the den, and then voices, clear, distorted by the echo, but unmistakable. The paperwork is tricky, Jessica. The voice was smooth, oily, carrying a cadence of false reassurance. Arthur Sterling. My stomach dropped. Arteris was my lawyer. My oldest friend. We had played golf every Sunday for 20 years. He was the man who wrote my will. He was David's godfather. The SEC monitors these kinds of rapid liquidations. Arthur's voice echoed down the shaft. Moving $40 million of assets into offshore shell companies in 3 days? That raises red flags, my dear. That's why you're here, Arthur, Jessica's voice replied, sharp and impatient. That's why you're getting 5%. 5%, Arthur mused. I could hear the clinking of ice in a glass. He was drinking my scotch. 10 seems more appropriate for high treason, don't you think? Technically, this is fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Arthur, you too? I felt the knife in my back twist. It wasn't just my family. It was my inner circle. The people I had trusted with my life were carving up my corpse while it was still warm. Fine, Jessica snapped. 10. Just get it done by Saturday. Saturday? Arthur asked. Why the rush? The Victory Gala, she said. We announce the sale. We toast Thomas's memory. We play the grieving family one last time, and then we leave for Zurich on the midnight flight. Saturday. I pulled my head out of the vent, gasping for air, dust coating my face. Today was Wednesday, Thursday. Saturday was at most 3 days away. They were going to liquidate my life's work. They were going to steal the pensions of 1,000 workers, men and women who relied on Vance Construction to feed their families. They were going to burn it all down and run. I needed to send a message, but to whom? The staff had been fired. At Jessica mentioned cleaning house. My friends thought I was dead. The police had a death certificate signed by a crooked doctor. I needed someone who knew me, Someone who knew the house better than Jessica did. Samuel. Samuel was my driver, but that title was an insult to the man. We had served in the army together, 45 years ago. He had pulled me out of a burning Humvee in the desert. He lived in the guest cottage on the edge of the estate, a lifetime lease I had granted him in the 90s. Jessica couldn't kick him out legally, not without a fight she didn't have time for. If Samuel was still on the grounds, he was my only hope, but he was a quarter-mile away in the cottage, unless he was in the garage. The main HVAC trunk line ran through the ceiling of the garage to keep the humidity controlled for my classic car collection. I couldn't shout. Shouting would dissipate in the ducts, or worse, alert Jessica. I needed a sound that would carry a frequency that would cut through the noise. I looked around the room. I picked up the heavy metal spoon from the tray of canned food. It was cheap stainless steel, but solid. I climbed back up to the vent. I reached deep into the shaft, finding a section of the duct that felt taut, resonant. I began to tap. Clink, 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 clink.
6.
LS3. Short. 3 long. 3 short. I tapped it in a specific rhythm, a syncopated beat. Samuel and I had used the field to communicate between foxholes when radio silence was mandatory. It wasn't just Morse code, it was our code. A stutter on the second beat. Clink, clink, clink. I did it for 10 minutes, then 20. My arm began to burn. The muscles in my shoulder tied into knots. The sound was maddeningly repetitive, bouncing back into my own skull. Am I just tapping into the void? Is anyone listening? I imagined the sound traveling through the aluminum veins of the house, vibrating past the kitchen, past the library, running along the ceiling of the garage where Samuel polished the chrome of the '67 Mustang. An hour passed. My hand cramped. The spoon began to dent. I switched hands. Clink, 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 clink. Please, old friend, I whispered, sweat dripping from my nose. Be polishing the car. Be drinking your coffee in the garage. Just be there. I struck the metal again, putting all my rage, all my hope, and all my remaining strength into the rhythm of survival. The next day, or what I assumed was the next day, the rhythm of the house changed. The thrumming of the ventilation fan hitched, then resumed. And then the sound I had been praying for and dreading in equal measure, the heavy clank hiss of the hydraulic deadbolts retracting. I scrambled back to the cot, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I hid my hands behind my back, fingers raw, bloody, and stained with the metallic dust of the ventilation shaft. I couldn't let them see. I had been working. The heavy steel door groaned outward. Light spilled in, not the sickly yellow of my cell, but the crisp white halogen light of the hallway. I squinted, shielding my eyes. A silhouette stood in the frame. Not this imposing bulk of security. Not the sharp, angular form of Jessica. It was David. He stood on the threshold, hesitant, terrified. He held a silver serving tray with shaking hands. The smell wafted in before he did. Rich, savory, familiar. Rosemary, garlic, slow-roasted beef. It was the smell of Sunday afternoons. The smell of a life that felt 1,000 years gone. Dad, he whispered. The word cracked in the middle. David, I said. I sat up slowly, keeping my posture rigid, regal. I would not let him see me cower. Come in, son. He hesitated, looking over his shoulder at the empty hallway, checking for monitors, for guards, for his wife. He stepped inside. He didn't lock the door behind him, but he stood with his back pressed against it, as if ready to bolt. I brought you dinner, he said, his voice trembling. Pot roast. It was always your favorite. Cook made it before she was let go. He set the tray on the small, rusted table. The silver looked obscene against the damp concrete. David, I said softly, ignoring the food. Look at me. He wouldn't. He stared at his expensive Italian loafers. He looked terrible. His face was gaunt, gray-skinned. His eyes were sunken, rimmed with red, the whites yellowed from lack of sleep. He hadn't shaved in days. A patchy dark stubble covered his jaw. Look at me, I commanded, the voice of the CEO cutting through the damp air. He flinched and looked up. Tears were streaming down his face. silent and steady. "This isn't you," I said, dropping my voice to a gentle, persuasive hum. "I know you. You're scared. Jessica's pushing you. She has a strong will, I know that. She dominates a room. But you are a Vance. We can walk out of here," I pleaded, leaning forward. "Right now, the door is unlocked. We walk up the stairs, we get in the car, we go to the police precinct." "I can't," he sobbed. "Yes, you can. We tell them it was a mistake, a mental health crisis. I'll say I had a breakdown. I'll say I asked to be put here. We can spin this, David. I have the best PR team in the country. I will protect you." I saw the war in his eyes, the terrified boy who wanted his father to fix the broken toy versus the weak man who was terrified of his wife. For a second I saw him sway toward me. Then the fear hardened into something brittle and ugly. She found the offshore accounts, Dad," David choked out. "What accounts?" "The ones I set up," he confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush of guilt. "I was skimming for 2 years. I wanted to start my own venture capital fund. I wanted to show you I could build something too." I stared at him. "You were embezzling from your own inheritance." "I lost it," he whispered. "Bad bets on tech futures. It's gone. 4 million. Jessica found the statements. She knows everything. She forged the transfer documents for the sale. But I signed them, Dad. I signed everything as the executor." He looked at me, his eyes pleading for an absolution I couldn't give. "If we stop now, I go to jail. Not just for this, for the fraud, for the embezzlement. I'm an accomplice to all of it. I can hire Walter," I said, my voice hardening. "We can fight the charges. We can pay restitution. But if you go through with this, if you sell the company to the consortium, if you destroy the charity, there is no coming back. You are crossing a line that ends in hell, David." David wiped his nose with the sleeve of his cashmere sweater. He took a deep, shuddering breath. The child died in his eyes. The coward took the wheel. "I can't take the risk," he whispered. "I'm sorry, Dad. It's too late. The gala is tomorrow night. The buyers are flying in. And after?" I asked, my voice cold as the grave. "After you sell my company? After you toast my memory?" She says we'll hire a nurse," he mumbled, looking at the door, "to come check on you once we're in Zurich, once the extradition treaties can't touch us." "A nurse?" I laughed. It was a bitter, barking sound that echoed off the steel. "You are not that stupid, David. You know what she is. She's going to seal this room. She's going to weld that door shut. She's going to bury me here. And you know it." David flinched as if I had struck him. He backed away, his hand fumbling for the door handle. "Eat your dinner, Dad. It's getting cold." He turned and ran. He didn't walk, he fled. The heavy door slammed shut. The bolt slammed home, with a sound like a gunshot. Click-clack. Thud. I was alone again. I stared at the pot roast. The steam rose in the damp air, curling like a beckoning finger. I stood up. I walked over to the tray. I picked up the porcelain plate. It was fine, bone china, rimmed in gold. My mother's pattern. I looked at the meat, the gravy, the perfectly roasted carrots. "No more," I growled. I hurled the plate against the far wall. Crash. The china exploded. Shards flew like shrapnel. Gravy and meat slid down the wheaten concrete wall like an abstract painting of gore. I stood there heaving, my hands clenched into fists. The father in me died in that moment. The man who had protected David from his own failures, who had paid for the wrecked cars and the hushed-up scandals, was gone. In his place stood the builder, the shark, the man who had destroyed competitors for breakfast in the 80s, the man who knew that, in construction, if a support beam is rotten, you don't patch it, you cut it out. If they wanted a war, I would give them a war, and I would scorch the earth. I needed intelligence. I went back to the vent. I spent hours standing on the wobbly cot, my ear pressed to the cold metal duct. I heard heels clicking on the hardwood floor above, not Jessica's rapid-fire staccato. Heavier, slower, Mrs. Vance. I cannot find the deed to the warehouse district properties. Mrs. Higgins. My heart leaped. She was my executive assistant for 30 years, a bulldog in a cardigan. She knew where every skeleton was buried because she had helped dig the holes. I told you Martha filed it, Jessica's voice replied, sounding strained and irritated. Check the archive boxes. Mrs. Advance passed 3 years ago, Mrs. Higgins snapped. I could hear the rustle of papers. Thomas always kept the deed in the floor safe in the study, along with the original incorporation papers. Well, Thomas isn't here, is he? Jessica hissed. And we don't have the combination. No, Miss Higgins said slowly, and neither is his will. I've looked everywhere. The safe deposit box key is missing from his keychain. Keep looking, Jessica ordered. If we don't have the deed, the Chinese won't wire the second tranche of payment. Good woman, Higgins, I thought. Keep stalling, keep digging. They were scrambling. The cracks were showing. That night, I changed the signal. I climbed back up to the vent. I didn't tap Seisho. I tapped the code, attack. Bang, 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 bang. 2 hard strikes. A pause. 3 rapid strikes. It was the signal for laying down suppression fire. It meant, engage the enemy. I did it for an hour. Suddenly a sound came back. It wasn't an echo. It was distinct. Sharp. Metal on metal. Scrape. Tap. Scrape. It was coming from the intake vent itself. I pressed my ear against the cold metal mesh. Thomas? The voice was faint, distorted by 50 feet of galvanized steel and bends in the ductwork. But I knew it better than my own son's. It was deep, gravelly, yearned by cigarettes and shouting. Samuel, I hissed into the vent. Samuel, can you hear me? I hear you, boss, the voice came back, sounding incredulous. Jesus, Mary and Joseph. I knew it. You knew? I knew that witch was lying, Samuel growled. I saw the soil at the cemetery. Fresh sod over loose fill. No depth. They didn't dig 6 feet, Thomas. They barely scratched the grass. And the urn, it was too light. Samuel, listen to me, I said, speaking quickly, my mouth pressed against the dust. We don't have time. They are selling the company tomorrow. The gala. They have me locked in the storm shelter. I'm coming in, Samuel said. I heard the metallic click of a slide racking. I've got the Remington 870 in the truck. I'll blow the hinges off. No, I commanded. Stand down, Sergeant. But boss, no guns. Jessica has private security. Mercenaries. Ex-Blackwater types. If you come in shooting, they'll kill us both and claim self-defense. They'll say you were a disgruntled employee, and I was a tragic casualty of the crossfire. We need to be smarter, I continued. We need to destroy them publicly. We need to strip them of everything. What's the play? The gala, I said. Who is attending? Everyone, Samuel replied. The mayor, the governor, the entire board. She's turning it into a memorial fundraiser. 5,000 a plate. Perfect, I said. A cold smile touched my lips. I need you to get the police, but not just the local cops. She owns the precinct captain. You need the state police, or the FBI. Get Detective Miller. He's the one honest cop left in this city. Miller won't believe a crazy old driver without proof, Samuel said. He needs probable cause. They'll think I'm grief-stricken and senile. Then give them proof, I said. The vent you are speaking into, it vents to the outside garden, right? Behind the azalea bushes. Yeah, I'm lying in the mulch right now. I looked around the room. I needed something irrefutable, something that screamed. I am here. My eyes landed on the shattered plate. A sharp triangular shard of bone china lay near my foot. It was razor sharp. I picked up the shard. I tested the edge against my thumb. It drew a thin red line instantly. I rolled up the sleeve of my pajamas. My left forearm was thin, pale, the veins blue and prominent. Samuel, I said, I'm sending you something. Catch it. I didn't hesitate. I sliced the skin of my forearm. A long diagonal cut, deep enough to hit the vein but not the artery. Pain flared, hot and bright, searing up my arm. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself not to cry out. Blood welled up, dark and rich. It ran down my wrist, dripping onto the floor. I grabbed the white linen napkin from the dinner tray David had left. I pressed it to the wound. I watched the white fabric turn crimson. I squeezed my arm, pumping the evidence out of my body. It throbbed. I felt dizzy, the edges of my vision graying out. More. It needs to be undeniable. When the napkin was sodden, heavy with my life force, I rolled it into a tight, wet cylinder. Here it comes, I grunted. I shoved the bloody cloth through the slats of the vent. It caught for a second, then slipped through. I heard it slide down the metal chute. Rustle. Plop. Got it, Samuel said. His voice was grim. It's hell, Thomas. That's a lot of blood. Take it to Miller, I said, clutching my bleeding arm. Tell him to run it against the coroner's report. If I'm dead and cremated, I can't be bleeding fresh. Oh, negative. I'm on it. One more thing, I said, fighting the lightheadedness. Don't come to the door. Come to the ballroom. The ballroom? Tomorrow night, I said. When she makes her speech? When she thinks she has won? Crash the party, Samuel. Literally. Understood, Samuel said. I could hear the grin in his voice. Sharp and wolfish. I'll put the push bar on the truck. I always hated those French doors. Go? I heard the crunch of footsteps receding in the mulch. I slumped against the wall, clutching my bleeding arm, wrapping the rest of the torn sheet around it. The pain was grounding. It was real. I looked at the blood smeared on the concrete floor. The die is kept. The next 24 hours were an exercise in agony. The cut on my arm throbbed with a rhythmic, hot precision, sinking with the beat of my heart. I had lost a pint of blood, maybe more. Lightheadedness came in waves, washing over me like a gray tide, threatening to pull me under into unconsciousness. But I refused to sleep. Sleep was the cousin of death, and I had work to do. I sat in the corner, pressing a fresh strip of linen against the wound. I watched the shadows lengthen and retreat as the bulb overhead flickered. I thought of David. I replayed our conversation in my mind, dissecting it frame by frame. I brought you pot roast, the banality of evil. He hadn't come with a gun or a knife. He had come with a dinner tray, offering comfort while he buried me alive. It was that weakness, that moral malleability, that hurt worse than the betrayal itself. I had raised a son who couldn't even commit a crime with conviction. He was a hollow man, filled with his wife's ambition. The smell of the spilled pot roast, now souring on the concrete floor, began to change the ecosystem of the room. The meat had gone cold, the gravy congealing into a gelatinous film, but for the creatures that lived in the dark, damp beneath the foundation, it was a feast. I heard it first, scritch, scritch. It was coming from the drain pipe under the sink. A pipe I thought was sealed with a P-trap, but the water in the trap had likely evaporated years ago. A nose appeared.
Pink, twitching.
Then beady black eyes that reflected the yellow overhead light. A rat, and not a small one. It was a sewer rat, the size of a kitten, its fur matted and greasy. It squeezed through the drain grate, its claws clicking on the ceramic tile of the sink area. It paused, sniffing the air, sensing the blood in the beef. It looked at me. It didn't run. It assessed me. In the animal kingdom, weakness is a beacon. It smelled my infection, my exhaustion. It knew I was wounded prey. I sat perfectly still. You're hungry, I whispered. So am I. The rat skittered down the leg of the sink stand and made for the spilled roast. It began to eat, tearing at the meat with ravenous speed. I watched it. I felt a strange kinship with the beast. We were both trapped in the bowels of this house, scavenging for survival while the beautiful people lived in the light above. But I couldn't share my space, not with a vector for disease. If it bit me, the infection would finish what Jessica started. I slowly reached for the heavy metal bucket I had used to mix water and soap for my bath. The rat froze. Its ears swiveled. I didn't lunge. I waited. It went back to the meat. I moved with the sudden, violent speed of a striking cobra. Clang! I slammed the bucket down over the rat. The creature shrieked, a high, piercing sound, and thrashed against the metal sides. The bucket danced across the floor, scraping against the concrete. I threw myself forward, pressing my weight onto the bottom of the bucket. Got you, I panted, sweat dripping from my nose. I reached for a heavy can of condensed soup, cream of mushroom, and placed it on top of the bucket. Then another. Then the case of water, the thrashing. Inside slowed, then stopped. I didn't kill it. I didn't have the heart to crush it. Stay there, I whispered to the trapped animal. You're just trying to survive too. But this is my cell. The afternoon dragged on. My arm ached. The thirst returned, fierce and dry. Then the intercom crackled to life again. Check the prisoner, Jessica's voice. But different this time. Tense. The cool, liquid confidence was fraying at the edges. I want to know if he's resolved.
Resolved. A polite euphemism for dead.
I heard the heavy clank of the deadbolts. I scrambled back to the cot. I lay down, pulling the thin blanket up to my chin to hide the bandage on my arm. I turned my face to the wall, letting my body go limp. I slowed my breathing. Inhale. Hold. Exhale. Hold. The yogic breathing Martha had forced me to learn, in the 90s, to manage my blood pressure. Now, it was a survival tactic. The door opened. It wasn't David. The footsteps were heavy, confident, shaking the floor. The smell of stale tobacco and gun oil filled the room. Marcus. He was the head of the private security firm Jessica had hired for the transition, a giant of a man with dead flat eyes and a scar running down his neck, shrapnel from a Fallujah, or a bar fight in Jersey. He was a predator who wore a suit. Jesus, Marcus grunted. Smells like a grave in here. He walked over to the cot. I felt his presence looming over me, blocking the light. He kicked the leg of the cot, hard. Wake up, old man. I didn't move. I kept my eyes shut, my jaw slack. He kicked my leg. The toe of his tactical boot connected with my shin. Pain exploded sharp and blinding. It took every ounce of my will not to gasp, not to curl up. I forced my muscles to remain flaccid, unresponsive. I was a sack of meat. She wants to know if you're dead yet, he muttered. He leaned down. I felt his calloused hand on my neck, pressing into the carotid artery. My heart was beating slow, faint, thanks to the breathing technique and the blood loss. Weak, he whispered, barely ticking. Maybe another day. He stood up. I could hear him shifting his weight. He wasn't leaving. He was looking around. He walked to the small table where I had left my cufflinks. They were gold, inlaid with onyx. Martha had given them to me for our 30th anniversary. They were engraved on the back forever. I heard the clink of gold on gold. Nice, Marcus muttered. I heard the rustle of fabric as he slipped them into his pocket. Thief. The rage flared hot in my chest. He was robbing a dying man. He was stealing Martha's gift. Take them, I thought, visualizing his face. Take them. They'll be the evidence they find on your corpse. He's out cold, Marcus shouted toward the open door, his voice booming in the small space. Is he dead? Jessica yelled back from the hallway. Her voice sounded hopeful. Not yet. Comatose. He won't wake up. Good, she replied. Leave him. Seal it up. We have guests arriving in 2 hours. The door slammed. The bolts engaged. Click, clack, thud. They were so sure. They were so arrogant in their victory. They thought I was a broken old man fading into the dark. That was their mistake. They had forgotten that pressure creates diamonds, and it creates explosions. I sat up. I rubbed my bruised shin. I checked my watch. Force of habit, though my wrist was bare. It was Saturday night, the gala. I stood up and walked to the sink. I turned on the tap. The water sputtered, brown at first, then clear. I washed my face. I scrubbed the dried blood from my arm. I combed my gray hair with my fingers, smoothing it back. I looked at myself in the small polished steel mirror above the sink. My eyes were dark, hollow, surrounded by bruises of exhaustion. My skin was pale as paper. But the fire was there. I looked like a specter. A revenant. Perfect, I whispered. Time passed. Then the house began to wake up. It started as a low thrum through the ceiling, the base of the sound system. Then the vibrations of 100 pairs of feet. I could hear the muffled roar of the party, the clinking of crystal glasses, the murmur of conversation. I closed my eyes and pictured the scene upstairs. The grand ballroom, the chandeliers glittering, the expensive, floral arrangements, white lilies, funeral flowers. No doubt, the mayor would be there, shaking hands, drinking my 1990 Bordeaux. The board of directors would be there, nodding solemnly as Jessica played the weeping widow. They were celebrating my death. They were dividing my empire over shrimp cocktails. I walked to the heavy steel door. I placed my hand on the cold metal. "Enjoy it," I whispered. "Enjoy the wine. It's the last drink you'll ever have in this house." I waited. I wasn't waiting for a miracle. I was waiting for Samuel. I knew him. He was punctual. If he said he would be there, he would be there. It happened at 9:15 p.m. I heard Jessica's voice booming over the house's PA system, muffled but audible through the vents. "Thank you all for coming," she purred. The microphone feedback whined slightly. "Tonight is a night of sorrow, but also of hope. Thomas would have wanted us to move forward. He would have wanted us to secure the future. Liar. And then the world ended. It wasn't a sound, it was a concussion. Boom! The ground shook. Dust rained down from the concrete ceiling of my cell, coating my hair in gray powder. The vibration traveled through the floor, up my legs, and into my teeth. It sounded like a bomb going off, or a 3-ton Ford F-350 truck, hitting a load-bearing wall at 60 miles per hour. Upstairs, the music died instantly. Then came the screams, high, terrified shrieks of the social elite facing sudden violence. "What is that?" Jessica shrieked over the PA, her composure shattering. "Security, Marcus." The lights in my cell flickered. Once, twice, then they died. Total darkness, but only for a second. The emergency red lighting bathed the room in a bloody glow, and with the power cut, the magnetic locks on the electronic security system disengaged. The heavy steel bolts on my door were mechanical, but the electronic maglock that held the handle rigid, that was fail-safe. I had designed it that way. In case of a fire, the doors had to open. "Thank you, OSHA regulations." I grabbed the wheel. I turned it. It resisted. Rust. Friction. The weight of the steel. "Come on," I growled. I braced my foot against the wall. I put my injured arm into the wheel, ignoring the searing pain that shot up my shoulder. "Open." I threw my entire body weight against the rotation. Creak. The wheel turned. The bolts retracted with a groan of metal on metal. I pushed the door. It swung open. I stepped out into the hallway. The air was cool. It smelled of ozone and dust. The hallway was empty. The guard who was supposed to be posted there, gone. Running toward the crash upstairs. I didn't run. I adjusted my torn silk pajama top. I tightened the makeshift bandage on my arm. I picked up a heavy, 3-foot length of steel pipe that had been leaning against the wall, a remnant of some long-forgotten repair. It felt good in my hand, heavy, lethal, a scepter for a king returning to his throne. I walked toward the service elevator. I pressed the button. The emergency generator kicked in, and the elevator hummed to life. The doors opened. I stepped inside. I pressed the button for the ground floor. As the elevator began to rise, leaving the tomb behind, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Thomas Vance, the victim, was dead. He had died in that basement. The man rising in the elevator was something else entirely. I was the judgment. The service elevator ascended with a smooth, hydraulic hum that felt jarringly civilized after the jagged brutality of the basement. I watched the floor numbers light up on the digital display. B3, B2, B1. I leaned against the stainless steel wall, the cold metal seeping through my thin pajama top. I was lightheaded, the edges of my vision fraying into static, but adrenaline acted as a splint for my crumbling stamina. I gripped a length of steel pipe in my right hand. It was heavy, rusted at one end, a piece of gas piping I had found near the generator. It wasn't a weapon of war, it was a builder's tool, and I was about to dismantle my own house. Dang! The elevator stopped at the ground floor. The doors slid open, revealing the cavernous commercial kitchen. It was a scene of interrupted industry. Trays of shrimp cocktail sat sweating on the granite island. A pot of bisque bubbled violently on the industrial range, threatening to boil over. A tower of champagne flutes stood waiting to be filled. But the people were gone. The catering staff had fled, spooked by the crash. The room was silent, save for the hiss of the boiling soup and the distant chaotic shouting from the ballroom. I stepped out, my bare feet slapped against the quarry tile floor. I moved past the prep stations, a ghost haunting his own banquet. I saw a silver platter of hors d'oeuvres. I picked up a single cracker and ate it. The salt hit my tongue like an electric shock. I hadn't realized how starving I was until that moment. Madre de Dios, the whisper came from behind the walk-in freezer. I turned slowly, swinging the pipe low by my side. Elena, the head housekeeper. She had worked for me for 15 years. She was a good woman. Pious, who sent money back to her grandchildren in winding envelopes every month. She was crouched behind a rolling cart of dirty dishes, her eyes wide, white-rimmed with terror. She clutched a rosary so tight her knuckles were white. "Mr. Van," she breathed, her voice barely audible over the bubbling soup. "Spirit?" She made the sign of the cross, her hand trembling violently. I walked toward her. I didn't smile. I didn't have the energy for comfort. "No, Elena," I said, my voice raspy but solid. "Not a ghost. Just a man who woke up early." I stopped in front of her. I saw the fear in her eyes turn to confusion, and then to a dawning, horrified realization. She saw the dirt on my face, the bandage on my arm, the blood. "Ghosts don't bleed," they said. She stammered. "Mrs. Vance said you were—" "She lied," I said simply. I looked at the double-swinging doors that led to the butler's pantry and the ballroom beyond. "Call the staff back, Elena. Tell them not to go far. The party is just getting started." She nodded, mute, unable to look away from the pipe in my hand. I turned and walked away. I was no longer Thomas the employer. I was a force of nature moving through the house. I moved through the butler's pantry, the narrow hallway lined with my grandmother's china. I could hear them now. The screaming had died down, replaced by a tense, vibrating silence and the bark of authoritative voices. I reached the service entrance to the grand ballroom. I didn't go in, not yet. I peered through the small, circular window in the door. The scene was a masterpiece of destruction. The French doors, the ones leading to the garden that Jessica had insisted on replacing with modern aesthetics, were gone. In their place was a gaping hole, framed by shattered wood and twisted metal, and sitting in the middle of the buffet table, amidst crushed ice and scattered lobster tails, was a beast. Samuel's Ford F-350, matte black, lifted suspension, a heavy steel brush guard welded to the front bumper. The truck was covered in dust and drywall. Steam hissed from the radiator, mingling with the fog of the dry ice from the raw bar. The headlights were still on, cutting two bright beams through the dusty haze of the ballroom. And there was Samuel. He stood on the hood of the truck, boots planted wide on the hot metal. He looked like a preacher at the end of the world. He wasn't holding a shotgun. He had listened to me. He was holding a bullhorn. Surrounding the truck, weapons drawn, were 6 uniformed officers. Not the local precinct boys who Jessica charmed at the policeman's ball, state troopers. Their hats were flat, their faces grim, and leading them was Detective Miller, a man who wore a cheap suit and an expression of permanent exhaustion. "Nobody move," Samuel bellowed into the bullhorn. The sound distorted, echoing off the high vaulted ceiling. "This is a crime scene." The guests, 300 of the city's elite, were pressed against the far walls, a huddled mass of tuxedos and evening gowns. The mayor was cowering behind a marble pillar. The board of directors looked like frightened sheep. On the stage, the tableau was pathetic. Jessica stood near the overturned podium. She looked small. Her perfect hair was disheveled, her face a mask of pale fury. David was behind her, literally using his wife as a human shield. He was shaking so hard I could see it from 50 feet away. "This is insanity," Jessica screamed, pointing a shaking, manicured finger at Samuel. "Arrest him. He's a lunatic. He's a disgruntled employee. He just drove a truck through my house." "We're not here for the traffic violation, Mrs. Vance," Detective Miller shouted back. His voice was calm, cutting through her hysteria. "We're here for the murder victim. He's dead," Jessica cried, her voice cracking, bordering on a screech. She grabbed a heavy bronze urn from the display table on the stage and held it up like a talisman. I have the urn. We buried him. This man is insane. Put the urn down, ma'am, Miller ordered, stepping over a pile of broken glass. No! This is my husband. This is Tace. She clutched the urn to her chest. You are desecrating his memory. I watched her. I watched the performance. It was brilliant. Even now. Cornered, with a truck in her living room. She was trying to spin the narrative. She was fighting for her life, for the lies she had constructed. She truly believed she could talk her way out of this. I looked at the heavy mahogany doors that separated me from the room. I tightened my grip on the pipe. The time for hiding was over. The tomb was open. Open the doors, I whispered to myself. I didn't push them gently. I kicked them. Bam! The double doors flew open, slamming against the interior walls with a sound like a thunderclap. The noise silenced the room instantly. Jessica stopped mid-scream. Samuel lowered the bullhorn. 300 heads turned in unison toward the service entrance. I stepped into the light. I knew what I looked like. I was barefoot, my feet gray with cement dust. I was wearing blue silk pajamas that were torn, stained with sweat, grime, and dried blood. My left arm was wrapped in a bloody rag. My hair was wild. My face was gaunt, the cheekbones sharp as blades. I leaned on the steel pipe like a cane. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. It was a physical sound, a vacuum of shock. Arthur Sterling, standing near the exit with a glass of champagne, dropped it. The flute shattered on the marble, the crystal chiming in the silence. I walked forward. I didn't limp. I marched. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. Men I had done business with for decades backed away, their eyes wide with superstitious horror. Women covered their mouths. "Hello, Jessica," I said. My voice was a wreck, raspy, damaged by the dust and the screaming. But in the absolute silence of the ballroom, it carried to the back of the room. Jessica's face went white. Not pale, translucent. All the blood drained from her head. She staggered back, her heels catching on the carpet, and she knocked over the flower arrangement. "Ghost," she whimpered. The word leaked out of her. "No," I said, walking steadily toward the stage. I didn't blink. I kept my eyes locked on hers. "Not a ghost," I continued. "Just a loose end you forgot to tie." "Dad?" The whisper came from behind her. David peered out from behind Jessica's shoulder. He looked at me, and his knees simply gave way. He fell to the floor, sobbing. "Oh God, Dad. Oh God." I ignored him. He didn't deserve my gaze. Not yet. I reached the stairs to the stage. I walked up them, one by one, thud, thud, thud. The sound of my bare feet on the wood was the only noise in the world. I stood next to Jessica. I could smell her perfume, Chanel, No. 5. It smelled like money. It smelled like the lie she had lived for 20 years. She was trembling so violently the urn rattled in her hands. I reached out and took the microphone from the floor where it had fallen. The feedback squealed, a high-pitched shriek that made the crowd flinch. I stood tall. I looked out at the sea of faces, the people who had come to drink my wine and bury my legacy. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said. I paused. I let the moment hang, heavy and suffocating. I apologized for the interruption. My daughter-in-law seems to have made a clerical error. I turned to Detective Miller. "Detective," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, gravelly low, "do you have the results?" Miller stepped forward, holding a tablet high so the room could see. "We ran the blood sample provided by Mr. Samuel against the DNA on file for Thomas Vance," Miller announced, his voice booming. "It's a match. Fresh blood. Oxygenated." He pointed a gloved finger at the urn in Jessica's hands. "And we just tested the ashes in the urn. We ran a portable spectrograph." Jessica clutched the urn tighter, her knuckles white. "It's not human remains," Miller said, his eyes cold. "It's wood stove ash mixed with clay kitty litter." A gasp rippled through the room. A murmur of shock and disgust began to build, a rising tide of judgment. I turned back to Jessica. "You falsified my death," I said, leaning in close so only she and David could hear the jagged edge in my voice. "You locked me in a basement for 2 weeks. You starved me. You stole my company. And you fed me cat litter." Jessica stammered. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for an exit, looking for an ally. She looked at the mayor. He looked away. She looked at the board. They were staring at their shoes. She looked at Marcus, her security chief. Marcus was on the floor, face down, being handcuffed by a trooper. She was alone. The fortress she had built on my back had collapsed. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. It was a vacuum that sucked the air from the lungs of 300 guests. The only sound was the high-pitched whine of the microphone feedback and the ragged, wet rasp of my own breathing. "Thomas," Jessica whispered. She took a step toward me, her hands trembling, reaching out as if to smooth the lapels of a jacket I wasn't wearing. "Thomas, please, you're confused." The doctor said. "The doctor," I interrupted, my voice amplified by the speakers, booming off the vaulted ceiling. "Dr. Evans? The man whose gambling debts I paid off in '98. The man whose practice you threatened to foreclose on." I took a step closer. She smelled of fear now, a sharp, acrid scent cutting through the Chanel. I was protecting you," she stammered, her eyes darting to the crowd, begging them to believe the narrative she was frantically rewriting in her head. "He was having a breakdown. We didn't know what to do. The stress of the business. He was dangerous to himself." "Liar." The scream came from the floor. "David." He was on his knees, his face buried in his hands, rocking back and forth. The pressure had finally cracked the vessel. "You said he was sick." David shrieked, looking up at her with eyes full of madness and tears. "You said it was the only way to save the money. You said he was going to ruin us." "Shut up, David," Jessica hissed, spinning on him. "Shut up, you weak little fool." "Save it for the jury, Jessica," I said. I looked at the urn in her hands, the bronze prop she had been parading around all night. "Give it to me." She clutched it to her chest. "No, give it to me." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. The command carried the weight of 40 years of authority. Trembling, she held it out. I took it. It was light. Pathetically light. I looked at the lid, sealed with wax. I didn't hesitate. I raised the urn and smashed it against the hardwood floor of the stage. Crash! The bronze dented. The seal popped. A cloud of gray dust puffed into the air. Granules scattered across the polished wood. I used the tip of the steel pipe to spread it around. "Kitty litter," I announced to the room. "Clay and wood ash. That is what my wife thinks of me. That is the value she placed on my life." I looked up. My eyes scanned the perimeter of the room. "Arthur?" I called out. Arthur Sterling was trying to sidle along the wall toward the emergency exit, using a waiter as a human shield. He froze. "Thomas?" Arthur said, his voice cracking. He held up his hands, palms open. "Thomas, listen to me." I was acting on instruction. "As your counsel, You're not my counsel," I said. "You're my executor, and you were executing me while I was still breathing." She forged the documents. Arthur cried, pointing a shaking finger at Jessica. "I didn't know, I swear on my life, Thomas. I thought you were dead." "You stood in my kitchen," I said, recounting the memory of the voice in the vent. "You stood in my kitchen 3 days ago. You drank my scotch. And you negotiated your fee. 5%. Arthur, was that the price of our friendship? 5%? Arthur's face went gray. He looked at the state troopers blocking the doors. He slumped against the wall, a defeated man. 10, I corrected myself. You negotiated up to 10. I turned my attention back to the stage. To the heap of misery on the floor, my son. My heart didn't break. It had already broken in the basement. What I felt now was a cold, clinical need for truth. "David," I said. He looked up. He looked like a child who had broken a window, terrified of the belt. But the window he had broken was my life. "Dad, please," he sobbed, clutching at the hem of my dirty pajama pants. "She made me. I was scared. She said she'd leave me. She said I'd go to jail for the embezzlement." I looked down at him. I remembered carrying him on my shoulders at the beach. I remembered teaching him to tie a tie. I remembered the pride I felt when he graduated. All of it turned to ash. "Stand up," I commanded. He shook his head. "Stand up," I roared, slamming the pipe against the floor. He scrambled to his feet, swaying, unable to meet my eyes. "You had a choice," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that the microphone caught and amplified. "I gave you a chance. Yesterday, in the basement, I begged you. I offered you an out. I told you I would protect you. David flinched. Do you remember what you did, David? He stared at his shoes. I left. No, I said. Be specific. As a builder, I need specifics. What did you do with the door? I closed it, he whispered. And then?
Silence.
And then? I pressed, stepping into his personal space. I locked it, he choked out. The truth hung in the air, ugly and naked. You engaged the deadbolts, I said. You heard the click. You knew I was in there. You knew I had no way out. You walked away, David. You went upstairs and ate dinner while your father sat in the dark. The crowd murmured, a sound of pure revulsion. Even the most cynical sharks in the room looked sick. That, I said, is not something a son does. That is not something a human being does. I turned to Detective Miller. Take them. The spell broke. The room exploded into motion. Troopers swarmed the stage. Jessica screamed. It was a feral animal sound. She lunged at me, her nails raking the air. You bastard, she shrieked. You controlled everything. You never let us live. You deserve to die. 2 troopers tackled her. They forced her arms behind her back. The zip-zip of the flex cuffs cut through her screams. She kicked and spat, her mask of sophistication completely gone, revealing the ugliness beneath. I want a lawyer. I want my phone. Get off me. David didn't fight. He went limp. The officer had to hold him up to cuff him. He stared at me as they dragged him away. Dad? He whispered. Dad? I didn't answer. I didn't look away, but I didn't answer. I watched them drag my son, my only child, off the stage and through the shattered remains of the French doors. Arthur Sterling was arrested near the buffet table. He tried to straighten his tie as they cuffed him, maintaining a shred of dignity that he didn't possess. The police escorted the prisoners out, the guests eating to filter out, escorted by officers to give statements. They walked past me with eyes wide, terrified to look at me, terrified to look away. Mr. Vance, the mayor stammered as he passed. I had no idea. If there's anything, go home, Mayor, I said tiredly. The party is over. The room emptied. The silence returned, but it was different now. It wasn't the silence of anticipation. It was the silence of a battlefield after the cannons have stopped. I stood alone on the stage, amidst the spilled kitty litter and the broken glass. My adrenaline crashed. The pain in my arm flared, white hot. My legs turned to water. I swayed. The steel pipe slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. Boss. Strong hands caught me before I hit the ground. Samuel. He smelled of diesel fuel, drywall dust, and old tobacco. He held me up, taking my weight without flinching. I got you, Thomas, he said gently. I got you. You're safe. He helped me sit on the edge of the stage. He took off his heavy canvas jacket and draped it over my shoulders. It was warm. It was real. You okay? He asked, looking at my bandaged arm. That looks deep. I'm alive, Samuel, I whispered. I looked at the hole in the wall where his truck sat. I'm alive? Yeah, you are, he grinned, though his eyes were wet. And you made one hell of an entrance. Detective Miller walked up to the stage. He looked exhausted. Mr. Vance, he said, EMS is on the way. We need to get that arm looked at. And we'll need a statement. Eventually, you have the blood, I said. You have the urn. You have the door. We have enough to put them away for 100 years, Miller assured me. Kidnapping, attempted murder, fraud, conspiracy. It's a slam dunk. I looked at the empty ballroom. The streamers were still hanging. The In Loving Memory banner was still draped over the balcony. I felt no joy, no triumph. I felt a vast, echoing hollowness. I had won the war, but I had burned the kingdom to do it. Samuel? I asked. Yeah, boss. Get that truck out of my living room, Samuel laughed, a real belly laugh that chased some of the ghosts away. You got it, but I think I scratched the paint. I closed my eyes and leaned my head against Samuel's shoulder. The house was quiet. The ventilation fan was silent. I was free. The scandal didn't just break, it detonated. The resurrection of Thomas Vance dominated the news cycle for months. eclipsing elections and natural disasters. I was the Lazarus of the Fortune 500, the man who clawed his way out of his own grave. The trial was a circus, but I watched it from the quiet sanctity of my office, detached as if watching a play I had already written. Jessica sat at the defense table, impeccably dressed, weeping on cue. She tried every angle: insanity, coercion, emotional distress. She painted herself as the victim of a tyrannical patriarch, but the evidence was a fortress she couldn't breach. The blood in the vent, the modified door, the cat litter in the urn. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts: kidnapping, aggravated assault, fraud, attempted murder. The judge, a stern woman who had no patience for theatrics, gave her 25 years without the possibility of parole. As she was led away, screaming threats at the cameras, she tried to sue me, a civil suit for infliction of emotional distress. My new legal team asked if I wanted to settle to make it go away. No, I told them. I countersued, not for the millions she stole. The insurance covered that. I countersued for $45. The cost of the pot roast she had wasted on the basement floor. It was petty. It was cruel, and it was the message she needed to take to her cell. I count every penny, and I forget nothing. David's trial was quieter. He pleaded guilty. He looked like a ghost of the man who had once been vice president of Vance Construction. He received 5 years in minimum security, a light sentence, mitigated by his cooperation and his clearly broken mental state. I didn't attend the sentencing. I couldn't watch the judge strike the gavel on my family name, but 3 months later, I went to visit him. The prison was a concrete box, smelling of industrial cleaner and despair. It reminded me viscerally of the basement. The irony was not lost on me. I sat on the visitor's side of the reinforced glass. David walked in. He was wearing a blue jumpsuit. His head was shaved. He had lost 30 pounds. He looked like a plucked bird. He sat down. He picked up the phone receiver. His hands were shaking. I picked up mine. "Dad," he breathed. "David, I didn't think you'd come. I almost didn't." He looked at me, searching for the warmth that used to be there. The father who signed the permission slips. The father who bought the cars. "Why didn't you help me?" he whispered, a tear sliding down his cheek. "With the lawyers? You could have gotten me probation." "You know the governor?" "I do," I said evenly. But I didn't call him. "Why?" "I'm your son." I leaned forward, the plastic receiver pressing against my ear. "Because you are 40 years old, David. And for 40 years I was the safety net. I caught you when you fell. I paid the debts. I fixed the mistakes." I paused, and because of that, I raised a man who couldn't stand on his own 2 feet. A man who was so weak that he let his wife talk him into burying his father alive. David flinched. "I'm sorry," he sobbed. "I say it every night. I'm so sorry," sobbed. "I know you are," I said, and I meant it. But sorrow doesn't rebuild a collapsed foundation. Only work does. Will you be here when I get out?" "I don't know," I said. 5 years is a long time. I'm an old man, David, and I have a lot of work to do." He put his hand against the glass. I looked at it, the hand that had locked the door. I didn't put my hand up to meet his. "Earn it," I said. "Don't ask for it. Earn it." I hung up the phone and walked away. I didn't look back. 6 months later, the air in Vance Construction was different. The purge had been swift and bloody. Anyone on the board who had voted for the sale was gone. Anyone in management who had been complicit with Jessica's transition team was fired. Arthur Sterling was disbarred and facing his own prison time. I sat in my office on the top floor, overlooking the city skyline I had helped build. The office was quiet, efficient. The charity foundation was fully funded. We were building 3 new orphanages in the state and a wing at the children's hospital. I looked at the paperwork on my desk. The acquisition of a rival firm. The numbers were good. The structural integrity of the business was stronger than ever, but the silence was loud. I pressed the intercom button. "Samuel?" "Yeah, boss." Samuel was no longer just a driver. He was the head of security. He wore a suit now, though he still looked like he wanted to punch someone. "Bring the car around. We're leaving early." "You got it." I stood up. I picked up my cane. I didn't really need it anymore. The physical wounds had healed, but I liked the weight of it. It was made of hickory, with a heavy silver head. It was a weapon, a reminder that I was breakable, but I could also break things back. I walked to the mantel. There was a photo there. Me and David, fishing in the Keys, 20 years ago. I had thought about burning it. Instead, I left it there. I didn't turn it face down. It was a reminder of the price of blindness. A reminder that the things you build can destroy you if you don't maintain them. The Lincoln Town car glided up the long, winding driveway of the estate. The house loomed ahead. The repairs were finished. The French doors were new, reinforced glass this time. The garden was blooming, the azaleas hiding the ventilation shaft where I had bled. It was a beautiful house, a masterpiece of Georgian architecture. But as I stepped out of the car, I felt the cold radiating from it. It wasn't a home. It was a mausoleum. It was a monument to a dead marriage and a failed fatherhood. "Wait here, Samuel," I said. "You sure, Thomas?" Samuel asked, eyeing the front door. "I don't like you going in there alone. Bad memories." "I'm just getting a few things," I said. "And the ghosts are gone, Samuel." I chased them out. I walked inside. The foyer echoed with my footsteps. I went to the study. I opened the floor safe. Now, with the new combination only I knew. I took out the deed. I took out the incorporation papers. I put them in my briefcase. Then I walked through the house. I walked past the dining room where the rat had died. I walked past the kitchen where Elena had thought I was a spirit. I felt nothing, no nostalgia, no pain, just the builder's assessment. Structure sound, occupancy 0. I walked back out to the driveway. I tossed the briefcase into the back seat. "Where to?" Samuel asked. "The club?" "No," I said. "To the lawyer." "Arthur's in jail, boss." "I know, I hired a new one. A young shark from Harvard. He's terrified of me. It's perfect." I got into the car. "I need to rewrite the will," I said, looking at the house one last time. "Leaving it all to the cats?" Samuel grinned, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "No," I said. "I'm setting up a trust." "For who?" "For the people who actually show up," I said. "My employees. The staff? The foreman who pours the concrete in the rain? And you old warhorse." Samuel went quiet. "Thomas, you don't have to shut up and drive, Sergeant." "What about David?" Samuel asked softly as we pulled away. I looked out the window. The house was shrinking in the distance, swallowed by the trees. "There's a clause," I said. "If he survives his 5 years, if he gets a job, if he works with his hands for 2 years without asking for a dime, then the trust opens a small stipend, enough for a rent and a truck." "A truck? Every builder needs a truck," I said. "He has to start where I started, at the bottom." The gates of the estate closed behind us. I sat back in the leather seat. I touched the scar on my forearm. The foundation had cracked. The house had fallen, but the ground was still there. And as long as there is ground, I can build.